Hey everybody, I'm Ryan, this is Will to Make, and today I'm going to show you how I built this beautiful kitchen table and bench set, all made from dimensional lumber. I started off this project with 4 2x6x10s for the top of the table. I cut each one in half to make them more manageable, then cut both sides to length to get a total of 7 pieces. Over on the table saw, I cut 2 of these boards down in order to keep the overall width of the table to 3 feet. Next, I laid out each board and inspected each one, ensuring the best side of the board is face down. The 2 smaller boards are on the outside of the tabletop. I then numbered the boards just to keep them in order for easier assembly. I could then mark out locations for pocket holes. Using the small pocket hole jig, I drilled out all the holes. Once all the holes were drilled, I could lay out all the boards for assembly. I used wood glue in between each board, but only applied it to the bottom of each board to try to minimize the squeeze out on the top. Then each board is screwed in. Using a sander, I flushed up each board to each other on both ends. Next, I needed to work on the breadboard ends. I first measured out each end of the table and cut a 2x6 to length for each side. I then marked out locations for dowels to connect the breadboard end to the table. Using the simple little jig and a Forstner bit, I drilled out holes in the end of the table. I lined the jig up with the marks I made earlier, and I would do the same on the side of the breadboard end. I found it easier to place the breadboard end on the ground and between my feet so I could get more pressure behind the drill. For the two holes on the ends of these boards, I needed to make the holes a little larger for wood movement, so I moved the jig a little over on each side of my first mark to make the hole larger. Once all the holes were drilled, I cut down some pieces of dowel. These are installed into the end of the table with wood glue, but when the breadboard end goes on, only the middle dowel will get glued so the two ends can still move freely for wood movement. Since the ends won't have glue, I drilled a hole through the dowel where a smaller dowel can slide through it and the breadboard end. This will keep the end locked into the rest of the table but still allow for the movement. With these dowels, I only applied glue to the top just to keep it in place. These can then be cut flush with the rest of the table. Now that the top was assembled, I could give it a rough sanding using 60 grit sandpaper. I used a mixture of wood glue and sawdust to fill in all the small imperfections in the top. Once this was dry, I sanded the top all the way to 220 grit. Also, I have links to all the tools and materials I use in this video in the description below, so please check it out. The top could then be set aside and I worked on the base. I cut all the pieces for the base from 2x4s. I cut out 2 long stretchers, 4 small stretchers, and 4 legs. Some of these pieces have a 15-degree angle on them to give the table legs a slight angle to them. The base is also assembled using wood glue and pocket hole screws. Here I place the board at the bottom of the feet to accurately measure up the legs for this bottom stretcher. The long stretchers can then be installed in between both of the leg assemblies. Next were the benches. I cut out 2 pieces of 2x6 to make up the top of the bench. These are assembled the same as the top of the table. And sanded up to 220 grit. The base was the same as the table, except for that the top stretcher for the legs is too small for pocket holes, so I drilled through the side of the leg and covered it up with a dowel. Then the 2 legs can be attached together with this long bottom stretcher. All the bases could then be sanded to 220 grit as well. Next, the bench top could be attached to the base. Since this is dimensional lumber, it's not always straight, but with some clamps I was able to wrestle it into position. The tabletop could be attached to its base the same way. The last step was then to apply multiple coats of polyurethane to all the pieces, sanding with 220 grit in between each coat. And with that, this project was complete. I absolutely love how this turned out and love the angles on the base. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you next time.